Hello, everyone, and welcome back again to the penultimate episode of the MUTEK Recorder. My name is still Claire L. Evans, and I am calling to you from Los Angeles, California, which I would like to take a moment to acknowledge is now and has always been the unceded ancestral indigenous lands of the Tongva and Chumash people. I will be your guide for the next half hour as we unpack and discuss some of the highlights of this morning's forum. With me behind the screens are my colleagues, Greg and Alexander from Holo magazine, who have spent the last 2 weeks in a state of total documentia. Every day of this forum, they have been watching panels, workshops, Q&As, and pulling together all kinds of references and key takeaways, images, footnotes, citations, all kinds of things for you to read, which they are publishing in the form of a daily dossier on the Holo magazine website. This dossier is a true labor of love. It is constantly evolving, always changing, and often appears on the Holo magazine website mere moments before we begin this live stream. So it's often as new to me as it is to you. It's a real-time publishing sprint, y'all. It's a living document, an experiment in radical recording, and it's been a wild ride, and I'm so glad that you've joined us for it. Every day on this stream, I'll be sharing some highlights from that dossier. But once again, I encourage you to explore it on your own time because there's plenty of interesting threads to pull, and there's so much more happening in the dossier than I can reasonably talk about in the first 10 minutes of this stream every day. Yesterday, we were joined in our recap by the Swiss designer and artist Jörg Lamy, who gave us a whirlwind and slightly overlong tour of his really fascinating practice. And every day, we'll be joined by a different special guest who will share their own interpretation of what recording means to them in their practice. So if you're just joining us, welcome. There's no time like the present. And if you're curious about past episodes of the Recorder, you can watch them in the MUTEK swab card or on the Holo website. Before we get to today's guests, let's take a bop over to the dossier and reflect on some of the highlights of the forum today, presented in beautiful dark mode. So we began today with Coinbase's chief content officer, Michael Casey, talking about the disruptive power of the blockchain and contextualizing the emergence of NFTs within a larger narrative about digital scarcity. As Casey observes, scarce resources for anything are the mechanism by which price. And so henceforth, crypto offers us an opportunity to create viable markets for digital assets and artworks that were previously enforced through buzzkill litigation and licensing laws. As he said during his presentation, until Bitcoin came along, we had no way of enforcing digital scarcity. Everything digital reproduced. This was actually a very instructive talk, I thought, with a lively sidebar chat. We'd love to see it. Talking about the ways in which one could, for example, own digital real estate, Michael Casey cited Silicon Valley's current buzzword of choice, I think, the Metaverse. And as a longtime reader of science fiction and as someone who has a science fiction writer as a guest on today's stream, I'd like to talk about the Metaverse briefly. I'm somewhat bemused by this universal adoption of the term Metaverse to describe the virtual real estate of the coming crypto era. As my friend, the writer Brian Merchant, recently pointed out in a piece for Vice, the Metaverse has always kind of been a dystopian idea. The word comes to us from Neil Stephenson's novel Snow Crash. And if you've read that novel, you know the Metaverse is a successor to the internet. It's a massively multiplayer online game that entertains the denizens of a world overrun by mercenaries and corporate overlords. It serves as an escape from reality, yes, but it also reaffirms the hierarchies and exclusions of meat-space reality. So the poor wear low-quality avatars and have limited access to the gated communities of the virtual world. So, you know, this isn't the first time that Silicon Valley has missed the point of its favorite science fiction novels. I mean, don't get me started about cyberpunk, but I really do hope that the leaders in this space take pains to ensure that the leap from IRL to the Metaverse isn't just another leap over a yawning digital divide. And while we're talking about semantics, I'm going to bop out of this view for 1 second. While we're talking about semantics, I think it's quite funny that we've abandoned good old-fashioned cyberspace. I mean, maybe it's kitsch now, but I think there's a lot of life left in the word. And when I'm thinking about these ideas, I often refer to this classic text Cyberspace First Steps. I know I'm always busting out books in this stream, but I am in my library, so what can I do? This is a published collection of essays that emerged from a 1990 conference on cyberspace that was held at UT Austin. It was one of the first sort of academic summits on this, quite mutable and ambiguous concept. And it's really, really instructive to read about how intelligent people were sort of defining this concept before the invention of the World Wide Web. So basically, they were looking at early VR systems on the one hand, VR systems that were being developed in a research or academic context, very bulky, sort of tethered headsets and all the like. And on the other hand, they were looking at text-based gaming systems, MUDs and MOOs and that kind of thing. And they were drawing this speculative line in between and trying to articulate what that space was, that cyberspace was. And I think we're doing something pretty similar now in trying to define the metaverse. So it's worth talking about. Anyway, I think it's important not to forget these Paleolithic histories because there's still quite a lot to learn from them. I'm going to bot back over here to show you that a shout out to a really great piece that was written not long ago by Kia Kreutler, an excellent essay called The Prehistory of DAOs, which makes a similar link between decentralized autonomous organizations and the guild structures which emerged in massively multiplayer online games like EverQuest and World of Warcraft. So I think we have that essay cited in the dossier here as well, and we can take a look at it on your own time. Anyway, essential reading, as is this fantastic text that I'm sharing with you now. In fact, many of the definitions of cyberspace in this book evoke the language that's used today to talk about the metaverse, albeit in a kind of more flowery way. So the theorist Marcus Novak explained that navigating cyberspace is to become a leaf on the wind of a dream. The conference organizer, Michael Benedict, who also edited this anthology, reveled in the sort of non-material topology of cyberspace, talking about how many of the axioms of geometry can be violated or reinvented, as can the laws of physics. But the pioneering virtual reality artist Nicole Stenger, I think, put it best when she was trying to describe cyberspace in 1990. Cyberspace, she wrote, the dessert of humanity. I hope we think about the metaverse in the same way. Anyway, speaking of the dessert of humanity, the next panel we watched closely this morning was Imagining Radical Futures on Cross-Cultural Visions of Humanity and AI. What an ambitious conversation. In a humble hour, our panelists tackled queer maps and data sets, African science fiction and its interpretation of the alien, the benefits and or shortcomings of anthropomorphizing artificial life projects through androids. This conversation got heated at the end, which was kind of thrilling to see, a really kind of exciting discussion about the perceived subjectivity or universality of science itself. Takashi Igagami, a researcher and professor of artificial life at the University of Tokyo, touted science's usefulness as a form of common currency or common language, explaining that what he sees as the sort of objectivity or universality of science allows him to have conversations and share ideas with fellow researchers from all around the world, regardless of cultural background. But meanwhile, some of our other panelists disagreed. Nadine Munsami, a senior lecturer of English at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, fundamentally questioned the idea that science could serve as a universal language because languages themselves are not a neutral medium and are infected with all kinds of systemic ideas about power and control. The artist Lucas Larochelle reminded us that science, like everything we do, is an embodied practice and comes with all of the attendant biases thereof. And our superhero moderator, I must say, Kanta D. Hall, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for the Future of Intelligence at Cambridge, shared some insights from her own PhD research into the surprising cultural variations that have occurred historically, even in the most sort of seemingly anodyne corners of science, like Newtonian physics. Everyone seemed to agree, regardless of this larger disagreement, that although science may not be universal in the sense that Professor Ikegami believed, art remains a common language, and when art and science coalesce, even the most conflicting perspectives can be examined and appreciated in their own right. Speaking of art and science coalescing, how's that for a segue? Today, my guest is the journalist and science fiction writer Tim Maughan. His nonfiction work traces the contours of uniquely contemporary phenomena, such as logistics and complexity, which informs his unique angle on the speculative, which I'm sure we'll discuss. He's a prolific author of short stories, and his acclaimed debut novel, Infinite Detail, imagines the world after the internet. Tim, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, Claire, nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
you sound like you've been super busy.
Yes, it's been a bit full on, I must admit, but a lot of fun. Anyway, the floor is yours.
Excellent, thank you. Have we got my slides? No. Yay! There
yes.
We go. Okay, cool. Okay, hi everyone. Thanks, Claire, and to MUTEK and to the Holo crew for inviting me back yet again. Every year, I think I've said something either basic or stupid enough to not get invited back, but so far they keep asking me. So maybe this year will be different though. A little about me, like Claire said, I'm an author, novelist and journalist based just down the road from Montreal here in Ottawa. When I'm not working on my own projects, I write for film and TV and help companies and organizations to think about the future. So I was asked to talk about my process today, which is something I get asked to do a lot. And I have to be honest, it always makes me super anxious and uncomfortable. I'm not sure exactly why, but I think it's for like a number of reasons. Firstly, I'm not sure what process even means, especially in terms of my own daily writing practice. I expect people want to hear about some kind of mystical secret, when the reality is mainly stress, too many looming deadlines, too many arguments with editors and producers, and too much trying to not succumb to professional jealousy or FOMO. I also worry that it's somehow extractive asking people about the process, especially writers. We live in a time where like everything from marketing to design, thinking to politics demands you be a storyteller and you have a narrative or you've done world building. And it's a time when everyone is expected to be or wants to be a writer, but somehow nobody wants to employ the ones we already have. I worry that revealing my secrets, if I even have any, is somehow making that situation worse. But mainly, I worry that a process is something I don't really have, and all this talk about it makes me feel like I really should, and that kind of freaks me out. I mean, of course, I do have a process, even if it's messy and inconsistent. I also have to spend a lot of my time doing research and, well, just thinking about shit. When I'm doing that, there's always one theme that flows through all my work. Always be asking, what could possibly go wrong? When presented with new technology, emerging trend, or someone's prediction for the future, I always ask myself this simple question: what could possibly go wrong? So a very obvious example of this in my work would be my debut novel, Infinite Detail, which is very much an exercise in asking what might go wrong. It's a novel that explores what could happen if the internet was suddenly destroyed and how it would impact everything from music to global supply chains. But before that, years before that book was finished and published, in fact, what could possibly go wrong had become my admittedly slightly sarcastic and tongue-in-cheek mantra for thinking about the future. One of the ways it bubbled up and out of me and into public view was on Twitter, where for a number of years, I maintained an ongoing thread that retweeted wide-eyed tech news headlines. But simply, whenever I came across one of these, I'd add it to the thread with a simple question: what could possibly go wrong? You can see a few examples here on the slide. You get the idea. This mainly came out of years of frustration and dismay at the uncritical nature of so much science and technology reporting, and especially lazy headline writing. Now, I'm not trying to be too critical of science and tech journalists. I've been there and done that beat myself for many years. I know what it's like. Like all journalists, everyone is very pressured and precarious, overworked and underpaid. As a result, lots of things get done at the last minute, and often it's easiest to just regurgitate a press release or even someone else's reporting. Plus, scientists often find themselves in a constantly precarious position where they have to sell the positive aspects of everything, because science, like news, also exists in the marketplace and constantly has to secure funding. Ask a research scientist. Cynicism, or even realism, doesn't really sell. And most importantly, I wanted to push back against Silicon Valley tech optimism, which takes and uses very science fiction imagery, just as Claire was talking about in the intro there, uses very science fiction imagery to sell us products and ideas, but minus the critical reflection that good science fiction always does. I cannot think of a better example of that than the Metaverse and Neil Stevens' Snow Crash. So this ended up being a thread that, like I mentioned, spans several years and hundreds of tweets. It's deleted now, sadly, only because I try to get around to deleting all of my tweets every year or so. It doesn't make it easy to do, but I recommend doing the same if you can. However, last year, Hollow Guys asked me to run a workshop based around the thread and this process, so I dove back into my Twitter archive and dug out some of the best tweets and reposted them to a new dedicated account. You can check out this account here, one WCPGW3. It's so catchy. Sometimes I even add new tweets to it. But wait, I know what you're all thinking right now. Isn't this just really obvious? Yeah, it is. You'd think it is, right? I mean, it's been the staple of science fiction for literally centuries. Summed up by this great quote from Fred Pohl, a good science fiction story should be able to predict not just the automobile, but the traffic jam. The problem is doing this just isn't in the interest of capitalism. When your ultimate goal is growth at any cost, the last thing you want is somebody pointing out how that might be problematic. As a result, we live in a culture that frowns upon any kind of negative reaction to exciting futures. It's labelled as cynical or fear-mongering, and those that do it are portrayed as haters. We just saw an abysmal example of this at the most bizarre of places, I have to say, a defence of Elon Musk by the once great Douglas Copeland in The Guardian just this weekend. The whole artifact is just fucking trash, to be honest, but this particular quote, possibly the worst sentence Dougie Boy has ever committed to print, both in terms of content and structure. Being negative is a stupid person's way of trying to appear smart without actually being smart. I mean, it's an infuriating and incredibly myopic attitude to take. But like I say, it's kind of a cultural norm now, at least in the tech industry. It's an incredibly appropriate line when talking about Musk, I'll give him that, because it's exactly what his legions of weird fans will say to you the second you dare criticize him. But really it's the golden rule of Silicon Valley, that those who innovate or disrupt are the only ones really trying to change the world. And the rest of us, the ones that have to pick up the pieces when shit inevitably doesn't work out, should stay respectfully quiet. As such, I think this act of thinking and talking about what could possibly go wrong is in its own way an act of defiance and resistance, even if a small one. It's one we should all take some time to indulge in. So like I said, I think this is an important thing everyone can try out. As I mentioned earlier, I've run workshops using this Twitter thread as a prompt, and it worked pretty well. It was a lot of fun. While the original tweets just took a headline and sarcastically added what could possibly go wrong, in the workshop we used the headlines as prompts to write alternative headlines about the future, about what actually had gone wrong. So these are headlines after the initial headline, kind of a catch-up on that story. Often they were hilarious or disturbing. You can try doing this at home, or in class, at work, wherever. I think it's a generally helpful prompt exercise to get you thinking about the future and how it's impacted by power and money. All you need to get started is a good, naive tech headline. Okay, so some examples from the workshop that we came up. So this is a headline from 2017 and for New Scientist, which, for full disclosure reasons, I used to write for. I didn't write this, to be clear. Tiny magnetic robot could be used to swim through your body and deliver medicine directly where it's needed. It sounds great, right? It sounds amazing. Medicine is good. What could possibly go wrong? Well, let's start with a quite mundane but serious and very realistic future headline as a kind of commentary on the fragility and opportunism of startup culture. Medi-Nano startup collapses, leaving trial patients without medication and support. Depressingly familiar, maybe, but not exactly mind-blowing. This one is a little bit darker. Man has liver repossessed after missing Medi-Nano insurance payments. This one came to me after reading a story about Tesla cars and how they can be remotely bricked if you don't make the payments. Or it might have come from being frustrated by the HP smart printer I have here that only accepts DRM'd ink. But that's a whole other short story. Here's another one, similar theme. Dozens of patients hospitalized after Medi-Nano software update problems. Patch coming soon. We all know that launch day patch pain, especially one for the gamers out here. And this one, now it's time to start getting a bit weird and sci-fi. Hundreds of Medi-Nano users missing after network bots become sentient. One for your AI panel earlier, maybe. Like, seriously, don't be afraid to get weird or freaky with these. If the last few years have taught me anything, it's that you can't dial back the weird when you're thinking about the future. Okay, this is the proper dark, serious cyberpunk plot time. Police, French ambassador assassinated via hacked Medi-Nano bot. Like, honestly, you start doing these and the short story or movie script ideas just magically appear in front of you. And of course, it's not sci-fi unless you get some body horror thrown in there. Medi Nano user's spleen ripped from body in tragic industrial magnet accident. I think that was the darkest place I could go with this one, was the idea that if you've got all these magnets in your body, they just get ripped out of you if you go in an MRI by accident or something. I've kept this very short. Sorry, a lot shorter than I thought. Sorry, Claire. I hope I haven't left you in the lurch. I didn't time to talk. I'm done now, basically. But anyway, that's it, really. Thanks so much for listening to me waffle on about this. I genuinely think this is a good exercise to try out. At the basic level, it might give you some interesting prompts or for writing or design projects. And hopefully it will help you think about the future in ways that capitalism, tech industry, hype cycle really doesn't want you to. Those guys legitimately believe only they control and build the future, so it's time to show them how they're wrong and maybe have some laughs on the way. Cheers.
Yes. Cheers, indeed. Not to like immediately try to think of a commercial venue for this concept, but it strikes me that these speculative headlines might actually be really useful for like the makers of the Medi Nano bots. I mean, has anyone ever sort of like tried to tap your world building capacities?
That's literally how I pay rent now, right? I'll be perfectly honest with you. I think I described it as helping people think about the future, but I think most of my income these days comes from working for private companies, and they employ me to, in a way, do this, right? Not in the quite so flippant a way, but they do ask me to. They ask me over or alongside other futurists. Let me start again. I don't really refer to myself as a futurist for the reason that the terms become quite muddied and messy, I think. And a lot of the time, companies who are employing futurists are getting people that come in and basically go to them, it's going to be great, your future's going to be great, your company's going to be great, invest in this, invest in that, go to Mars eventually, that's the future, it's going to be great. And companies go, that's wonderful, we like to hear that good things are going to happen, and they give them lots of money. And I offer a radically different service to that, I guess is one way of putting it. Like come in and go, no, this is fucked. You know, this is going to be bad. These trends are going to manifest in ways that we can't predict. You should be prepared for that. You should really think really hard before you get into bed with these people or these investors, because they have a track record of doing it. And this is the kind of stuff I look at and you know, point out emerging trends which aren't necessarily the most positive and most rewarding in some ways. It was a hard kind of sell for a while until kind of Trump got in, and then last year, and now suddenly I get more business this way, which is a really depressing thing to say. But now people are suddenly seeing, oh wait, the future might not be as rosy as we've been told by a lot of tech and futurist kind of people, and they're suddenly looking for people like me to come in and kind of give them a bit of a wake up call, I think.
Yeah, no, it actually kind of makes me hopeful to know that there is a market for, you know, realistic prognostication about what could actually go wrong. And not just that something can go wrong, but the different ways in which it could go wrong. That people actually want that makes me feel like people are, I don't know, like the companies are thinking the implications of their products actually are.
I hope so. I've been doing this for like quite a few years now, and there's always this kind of sneaking suspicion that I'm just a point on the checklist in some way. It's like, oh, well, we listened to Tim, we've been critical now, and just carry on and do what they were going to do anyway, right? I know that's not the case. And I did some work, I can't mention names, unfortunately, I'm usually under NDAs for a lot of this stuff. But for a very large European pharmaceutical company last year, and they actually, one executive wanted me to tone down stuff because they wanted to get in. I can't really talk about it. They wanted to get in a business partnership with a certain very large corporation, a very well-known large tech corporation, and the other executives stopped letting me put in the stuff that was critical about that, because they were like, no, the board needs to know what that would mean for our company if we were in a partnership with said well-known household name tech company. So I mean, I also hold out hope that they're listening to me. A lot of time I think they're not. I think a lot of futurism is very performative anyway. It's kind of it feels awful like team building exercises sometimes in workshops I do or I'm involved in, and that's fine, you know. But I just, if one person in the room has come out of that, walked out there going, maybe we shouldn't do this. Do you know what I mean? Maybe we shouldn't create artificial scarcity in virtual reality, because that's a complete fucking complete fucking betrayal of everything that virtuality represents and could be as an artistic form. Perhaps the first thing we do shouldn't be invent scarcity in virtual worlds. Maybe if one person comes out of thinking like that, then maybe it's done some good. Do you know what I mean? So it's my cause at the moment, being angry about Metaverse stuff.
Amazing. We only have a very short amount of time left, so I wanted to ask you another question, which is that, I mean, okay, we've talked about ways in which, does it go the other way around? I mean, your practice straddles fiction and nonfiction in this very interesting way, and it's fairly evident how, maybe your training as a journalist or your work as a journalist influences the fiction that you do, since you're obviously kind of working from a place of keen awareness about the state of things and the direction of things. But does it go the other way around? Does your fiction influence the kinds of stories that you seek out as a reporter? Either go ahead.
Yeah, very much so. I'm not really kind of very active as a journalist these days. I'm kind of, unfortunately, pleased to say, because it's really rough out there. It's brutal out there, like being a journalist. And I was lucky enough to, I had other projects and other work and consultancy work, and I'm doing some work for TV at the moment and things like that. I was lucky that stuff came in and kind of got me out of it before it got even worse a few years ago. And I laughed when you said training, because I have had no training in being a journalism and a journalist and being a journalist, and like like a lot of people now, we haven't. What was your question? Yeah, does it really? Yeah, wait. It's very much so. It's very much when I was doing regular journalism. That was very much. It's very much kind of. It's a cliche term, but kind of symbiotic like relationship between the two in some ways. I would go off and research a story. I would come back, write non-fiction about it. Like somewhere like the BBC or Motherboard or somewhere, very good at allowing you to have some opinion, but obviously you can't be emotive in a way as you want to. So I would then turn to writing short fiction about that topic if it was something that I felt very passionately about. Like, for example,
right.
when I went to China and looked at manufacturing there and stuff, I came back quite affected by that. And I kind of, writing about it for the BBC was great because I got out to a large audience, but at the same time, I wasn't allowed to kind of like deal with the demons that were in me from stuff. So fiction was a good way of getting that. But then it feeds back. Sometimes it's less me, it's less editors. Editors will come even now and ask me to write op-ed pieces of stuff based on my fiction and previous work. So the two are always feeding into each other. Yeah, it's hard to separate.
Do you ever feel like you're racing to write stories about things before they actually happen? I mean, not that I'm like big into the predictive quality of sci-fi, but you're right on the edge there. So it's timely.
It's really tough. It's really hard, and it's my own fault. I decided to write. I set out like 10 years ago when I started writing fiction. I very consciously said I want to write near future fiction. And when in science fiction people say near fiction, and you know this better than me, Claire, they usually mean like maybe in 50 to 100 years as opposed to 500 years. And I wanted to write near future fiction that's set in 5 years or 2 years or now even, right? And because I really think you can write science fiction that's set now. I think that's a very easy thing to do and a very useful thing to do in our current world. And it's tough. It's really tough. And I do have ideas for novels about things that have already happened. And so they're sat on the shelf. It feels weird to be writing them now. I'm trying to think of examples. This Metaverse stuff is a big one for me because 10 years ago this year, in fact, I self-published a collection of short stories all about augmented reality and virtual reality and culture and stuff. And just seeing the stuff that I was most concerned about happening in real life now. And a lot of those stories were about, and this was like, I say, 2011, 2012, 2010 even. I was writing stuff about celebrity gamers, which wasn't really a thing there, but about these back then. But these, people who were famous for playing video games, and thousands of people watched them play video games, which is now not just a thing that everybody knows. It's kind of like Twitch streaming is kind of like a household name. People know what that is, but these people going on to bigger celebrities in other ways, like again, other media jobs and branching out of just like game streaming and stuff. And that's really what I was writing about. So it's kind of that's been weird and rewarding in some ways, but it can be really, like you said, it can be really frustrating. Keeping ahead of the curve is tough. But getting it wrong is important, right? Being ahead of the curve, but getting it wrong is just, I really think it's just as useful as getting it right a lot of the time.
Yeah, well, you do it admirably. You do it well. I highly recommend that anyone watching this stream pick up Infinite Detail and follow Tim's work because it's really a useful framework for thinking about the world that we live in. Thank you so much for joining us, Tim. That's
Thank
our
you.
time. It's been a total pleasure. Tomorrow is the final day of the forum, so we're going to finish with Flair. The forum will host conversations about the aesthetics of Minecraft and how musicians can leverage fan data. And I will face down my final boss on the recorder. Benjamin Bratton will be joining me, doing a nice bookend with his kickoff festival keynote last week. I hope you can join us. I look forward to that conversation. And until then, have a great evening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.